Hello everyone and welcome to episode 51 of my World of Warcraft Human Mage level 1 to 60 playthrough, where it is currently late at night and raining outside, which means it is a very perfect time to hop into Azeroth and do some questing in a nice and cozy atmosphere, where this episode I believe is going to be the penultimate episode for this entire Let's Play series, which is very exciting, the second to last episode in the entire series. Where in this episode I want to continue our adventures in the Eastern Kingdoms, and I want to head north out of the Kingdom of Stormwind and back to the Kingdom of Lordaeron, and I want to do some exploring in two brand new zones we have never been to up north in Lordaeron, and these are going to be the final two zones that we spend a lot of time exploring in this Let's Play series. Of course, as we look forward to the future, we have more Let's Play series where we will be exploring more parts of the world of Azeroth, and we will be doing some exploring on different characters of different races and classes in different parts of the world, looking at different pieces of lore and story. But as far as this character goes, we are almost at the end. We are level 56 and over halfway to level 57, and in order to start off our adventures, I'm going to go ahead and Hearthstone to South Shore, where we are returning to Lordaeron once again for the final time on this character. And we will be pretty much spending the next two episodes in Lordaeron, with maybe going out and doing a few things in different parts of the world just to get some extra experience. Where the two zones that I want to explore are the Western and the Eastern Plaguelands, which are very cool zones that, especially in Warcraft 3, play a big part in that game's story, but they are both just very relevant zones and across like the Warcraft franchise, and very cool zones, and I am super excited to dive deep into the lore and story of these two areas. I think overall these are probably two of my favorite zones in the entire vanilla world of Azeroth, and of course with these two zones being very high level zones, where the Western Plaguelands is like level 52 to level 60, and the Eastern Plaguelands are level 55 to level 60. These are two zones that we don't really spend a lot of time in like an average playthrough, just because it's at like the end of your journey. But if you are someone who's really into like in-game content in World of Warcraft during the vanilla era of the game, you will be spending a lot of time in these zones because of two very important dungeons, and then the final raid of vanilla is located in the Eastern Plaguelands. But on the way there, I have a quest to come to the entrance to Alterac Valley, where I'm just going to go ahead and turn this quest in, and we are probably not going to be spending a lot of time exploring what Alterac Valley is in this Let's Play series, and we will do it in the future. So let's go ahead and turn in the Sovereign Imperative. Got 6,600 experience from that, and we are just going to leave this place for now, and let's head over towards the main road near Terran Mill, and we can go through Alterac here past Strombrad and into the Western Plaguelands. So there's Terran Mill way off in the distance back there, and we can now come through this way, and we are going to be going past the city of Alterac, the capital of this once great human nation, and we'll be riding past Strombrad. Of course, the last time we were here, we were in like the level 36 to like level 40 range, and we were just about to unlock our mount, I believe, and we were killing all the ogres around here, and we were getting the Parano Tiara, which we brought back to Stormwind, and we were dealing with the Syndicate, but that seems like a very long time ago now. And it's really fun to just run through like the old areas of the world that you used to quest in, because you remember your earlier adventures in these zones when you were a much lower level and like maybe even newer to the game and less experienced, and maybe this was like your first time running through this area, and now you're running through it for like your second time, or maybe even like your 100th time. But we're going to come out of the mountains of Alterac here back into some lush green fields with trees dotted around the landscapes, and this is a pretty well structured road actually here in Lordaeron, where the roads are actually pretty decent in going into the Plaguelands. However, the different strongholds and towns and encampments located in the Plaguelands are for the most part infested by the Scourge, so we're going to have to be very careful as we go through these next two zones, because they are very hostile territories where there aren't too many places of sanctuary or of safety located around these areas. And of course, we are now entering the Western Plaguelands, where we have Chillwind Camp here, which is pretty much the only alliance fortification of a ruined house and some tents here in the Plaguelands. And we can go ahead and report to this Argent Dawn officer right here, and we can go ahead and turn in the Everlook report that we got. And then we can also get our Argent Dawn commission, which is a very cool trinket, which we only have one trinket, so we can equip this, and we're going to get this special buff and be saluted there. And this will allow the acquisition of Scourge Stones on behalf of the Argent Dawn, where the different Scourge, the undead that we fight throughout the Western and Eastern Plaguelands, are going to drop Scourge Stones that basically we can just turn in for some reputation to increase our reputation with the Argent Dawn, so we can unlock their quartermaster and the different goods we can get from them, and so on and so forth. Let's go ahead and turn in a call to arms, the Plaguelands, and we can get a little bit of experience from this quest, and we can pick up that quest as well. And then we should definitely get this Flymaster right here, where that person is bugging out a little bit, and we now have connected most of the Eastern Kingdoms now. And let's run over here, where I think we can pick up this quest here, A Plague Upon Thee. Of course, I'll be doing some quests right now, and we will come back and do some quests in the future. And I guess I'm probably not going to be doing this dungeon quest, but we can pick it up anyways. So let's just go ahead and get that. It's 1 gold and 80 silver if you decide to do it. But let's go ahead and come this way to the first little question area that we have in the Western Plaguelands. And the mobs around here are going to be like level 52, so like level 53 or level 50 even. So we are definitely very powerful right here. And let's go ahead and just run around here and kill some of the different undead. Whereas we deal lethal damage to an undead, we will kill it, and we will get some reputation with the Argent Dawn, of course. And then when we loot the Skeletal Flayer, we will have a chance to get a Scourge Stone, but we did not. But we did get some bone fragments, which might be nice for something in the future. And there are 3 different tiers of Scourge Stones, where the most basic Scourge Stones you can get are from like the lowest level undead that you can fight in the 2 different maps, and then when you fight higher level undead, like more important like leaders out in the open world, I think you get a 2nd tier, and then you can get a 3rd tier from fighting like bosses and dungeons, I believe. There's a minion Scourge Stone from that Slavering Ghoul, so we can just throw this up here, and then we might turn it in for some reputation at some point. I believe with the minions one, you have to get like quite a few Scourge Stones, like 10, in order to turn them in for the reputation, and then the next tier up is like 5, and then the final tier you only need to get 1 of those. But we have a really cool spot right here called Uther's Tomb, which of course Uther the Lightbringer was an incredibly important individual from the earlier Warcraft games, where he is one of the founding paladins of the Silver Hand. And we have a high priest right here, and we have this placard here that says Uther the Lightbringer. Here lies Uther the Lightbringer, first paladin, founder of the Order of the Silver Hand. Uther lived and died to defend the kingdom of Lordaeron. Though he was betrayed by his most beloved student, we believe that his spirit lives on. He continues to watch over us, even as the shadows close in around our ruined land. His light is the light of all humanity, and so long as we honor his example, it shall never fade. Anonymous. So a very somber tomb here, but a very, very cool and important lore character who we see kind of pop up across the history of World of Warcraft's lore and story. I think overall, the Scourge are probably one of my favorite factions of enemies to fight across the entire game, and I just, in general, really like undead enemies for whatever reason. Like in Guild Wars 2, I like undead quite a bit, fighting like Awakened and Risen, and then fighting the Scourge here in like the Western and Eastern Plaguelands, and then elsewhere in the world where we fight them. And like the undead in Duskwood as well are always really fun to fight. And then the Wrath of Lich King expansion and adventuring through Northrend and fighting all the Scourge there are just a lot of fun for me, and I just enjoy like fighting these enemies. And of course Arthas is my favorite villain in all World of Warcraft, and one of my favorite, if not my favorite, villains in like all media. So I think it just like altogether, just exploring the Western and Eastern Plaguelands is a really fun experience for me, just because of how much I enjoy the enemies you fight and like the stories going on here. But now that we completed this quest, let's go ahead and come back over here to Chillwind Camp, and we can turn in this quest and we will unlock some more quests that we can do. But I think I'm going to head further into the Plaguelands, and we can run through the Western Plaguelands a little bit and then get into the Eastern Plaguelands and start doing some of the quests over there and kind of unlock the last of the fight masters that we have to unlock in the entirety of the Eastern Kingdoms. It might be the last one actually, but I'm not entirely sure about that. But now that I have all of those quests situated, let's go ahead and run out this way, and we can go ahead and follow the road to a very cool human town that is an incredibly important town in Warcraft 3, and it is of course Anderhall, which is like one of the biggest farming towns slash like bread making towns, I guess, in the entire kingdom of Lordaeron. We're of course here in the Western Plaguelands, and then in Eastern Plaguelands, and in the Terrasfog Glades and elsewhere. There are just a ton of farms, and a lot of that grain came here to Anderhall. And of course, during the Warcraft 3 campaign, the grain and the bread made from the grain was the primary method that the Scourge used to spread the undeath plague across the kingdom of Lordaeron, annihilating the people of Lordaeron and turning them all into the undead that we see here, and then elsewhere, like in Northrend, we see some as well. But I'm going to go ahead and just leave this area because the ruins of Anderhall, which you can see is a very big location, which is actually kind of a cool location in the Cataclysm expansion, because both the Horde and Alliance basically like reclaim a part of the city, and then you're fighting against the Scourge and like the other faction in order to gain more control of the city, which is a very interesting quest line. We're actually on that topic in the Cataclysm expansion. The Eastern Plaguelands is like one of the few quest lines in the entire like Cataclysm expansion that I actually genuinely liked quite a bit, and I had a ton of fun doing those quests there. But I also, of course, would love doing the quests in the Eastern Plaguelands in Vanilla WoW. So let's go ahead and head over there. I have some different quests around here that I can pick up, but I think I'm going to ignore them for now. And as we have journeyed through the Western Plaguelands, we have come to here to the Thondroro River, or however you pronounce that, which is the river that comes over here to Caradero, and this is the bridge, a really cool bridge, into the Eastern Plaguelands, which is the highest level zone in the Eastern Kingdoms, a level 55 to 60 zone that we see that has some PvP stuff going on. We already have a lot of quests going on here, quests to turn in, quests to pick up, some like special quests there. And I am going to go ahead and take a detour off of the main road, which is going to be the first of two major detours that we do. And we're going to come up to here to pick up 3 special quests that are going to lead to a much larger quest chain that we can focus on a little bit as we continue our adventures through these 2 zones. But the most important thing about these 3 quests is the individual that we pick these quests up, and the individual that we are helping by doing these quests in the Plaguelands. Where I mentioned earlier that Arthas, the Lich King, is one of my favorite villains in like all media, and my favorite villain in World of Warcraft, where this individual up here is kind of like the exact counterpart of Arthas, the Lich King, and coincidentally is kind of like the exact counterpart for what I like, where he is one of my favorite like allies and characters in all World of Warcraft. I'm not sure if he's like my 100% favorite, but he's definitely like my top 5, and it is of course Tirion Fordring, who we can talk a bit more about in the future, but he is just a really cool individual. Race does not dictate honor, human. While you remain on my farmstead, I ask that you remember and respect this credo. I have known orcs who have been as honorable as the most noble of knights, and humans who have been as vile as the most ruthless of scourge. But I shall not bore you with tales of my youth. There is much work to be done, if that is what you desire. And of course, Tirion Fordring is a very lore-rich character who is one of the founding members of the Silver Hand, alongside Uther the Lightbringer, one of the first paladins of the humans of the Alliance, and a very, 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 very important character moving forward in the story of World of Warcraft. And we have some different quests here where we can basically kill a bunch of the plagued wildlife across the Eastern Plaguelands, and we can go kill them and return to Tirion, just like how we can kill this plague bat right here. But this will be something that we work on as we adventure through the Eastern Plaguelands, because we have to kill quite a few different enemies here, where I think it's like 30 in each one, plus getting like 15 slabs of carrion worm meat, which could be a variety of different grubs we have to kill. But let's go ahead and return down here to the road. We have a lot more questy icons here now. And let's go ahead and get back to the road, and let's go to the second detour that I want to take. And as we have journeyed along the road here, we have come to this spot, which is a bit of a busy spot where we have right here a little bit of a house that someone used to own, which is now destroyed. And then up here we have a road leading to a tower, which is a PvP objective in this map. And then we can continue along the road here, which will take us to Corrin's Crossing and Stratholme, or we can go this way to Anderhaw, or we can go this way to Darrowshire, which this is the place that I want to go to, which is yet another super important location from the original Warcraft games. And if we come into our quest log here, and if I can find it somewhere, we can find this quest called Sister Pamela that we picked up in Everlook from one of the members of the Red Path family, where I fled Lordaeron during the Great War and was lucky to escape before the Scourge swept through my homeland and turned it into a plague nightmare. I was lucky, but my family was not. I fear they were all killed during the Battle of Darrowshire. Darrowshire is a village in the Eastern Kingdoms, nestled in the southern hills of what is now the Eastern Plaguelands. Will you go there and search for my family? I miss them so much, especially my little sister Pamela. Please, find her for me. Wish we have met members of the Red Path family throughout our time playing World of Warcraft, and we can go ahead and come down here and potentially meet yet another member of the Red Path family, where there is an elite mob right here, which I believe is bugged out because it is spawned from a quest that we can do later on, and it looks like it is the only one. So let's go ahead and skip past it. And we have Darrowshire here, which is a relatively like decent sized village. Of course, in like gameplay, it is much smaller than it is in lore. That's true with like every game like Skyrim and World of Warcraft and Guild Wars 2 and so on and so forth. But let's go ahead and come up here, and we can find Sister Pamela right here, Pamela Redpath, who is now a ghost, and it is a child, of course, a young child who was killed by the Scourge around here. And there was a player that just showed up right there and was turned into a ghost. And this is a very iconic quest where she is like kind of scared and isn't really sure what is going on, and we can go ahead and try to like calm her down and help her out by restoring her doll. So we can come all the way through here where this player just came into here, and I guess is doing this quest as well, and we can go ahead and try to find all of the different pieces of her doll, where we have the left side right here, and then we can find the right side, I believe, and then the head, and we can combine the three together in order to create the doll. And we have a ghost of the past that appeared that we can go ahead and strike down. And now that we have gotten all three of the parts, we can go ahead and right click to attach the pieces into a whole, and we now have Pamela's doll, which of course we can run up to here, and we can go ahead and turn this quest in to Pamela, where she is very happy that we did that. And now we have two quests to go talk to different members of the Red Path family, Auntie Marlene and Uncle Carlin, which Uncle Carlin is located at the next place that I want to head to in the Eastern Plaguelands, which is pretty much the only peaceful location in the entirety of the Eastern Plaguelands. And it is a very cool location because it is Light's Hope Chapel, which is a holy chapel located here in the Eastern Plaguelands, and it is basically like the only place, or one of the only places left in the Plaguelands, which is holy ground, and it is a bastion of hope against the undead scourge, and basically the main headquarters for the Argent Dawn and the Alliance and the Horde working out in this area and fighting back against the scourge. So let's go ahead and follow down this road, and we can make our way towards that chapel. And of course, as we journey down this road, we are not going to be able to get to Light's Hope Chapel super easily, and we're going to have to go out into the wilderness a little bit, or brave our way through this town of Corrin's Crossing, which has been overtaken by the Scourge, much like Anderhaw, and much like many of the different farms and outposts and other areas located here in the Plaguelands. I'm going to go ahead and just run past all of the Scourge right now, and we will probably return to Corrin's Crossing and kill a bunch of the Scourge here as we work on our different quests in this zone. But I'm mostly just going to skip past everything right now and head to Light's Hope Chapel, where if we go down this road, we can actually go to a outpost of the Scarlet Crusade, which is basically a faction of people that we have barely talked about. I think we met one individual in Stormwind. I think I went there and chatted with him for a little bit when we were in Stormwind around like level 35-ish or something like that. But other than that, we haven't spent much time talking to any of those members, and they are quite a fascinating group of people that we will talk more about in probably a future Let's Play series, and I might touch on a little bit as we talk about the different things going on in this zone, where we have the Pestilence Scar here, which I'm going to go ahead and just skip past as well, where there are some rotting sludges down there, some oozes, and we can go ahead, check our map, and we are heading in the right direction. Where we see coming up here in the distance, and we are now entering the zone of Light's Hope Chapel, or the subzone. And let's go ahead and just pick up some of the different quests that we can pick up around here. And basically, just like the last few episodes, after we are done talking about this area right here, I'm going to go ahead and head back out into the Western and Eastern Plaguelands, and we're going to do a bunch of questing that I'm going to speed up a little bit, and we are going to talk about the lore and story of this area. But I am not going to do that quest because that's a dungeon quest. Those are both dungeon quests. Here is Carlin Redpath, who is a member of the Redpath family that is alive, and we have a quest to basically avenge some of the people that fell in Darrowshire. And we have the Flight Master here, which if you check at the flight path map right here, we have, I believe, unlocked every single flight path in the entirety of the Eastern Kingdoms, but I might be missing one that's like not super important, and I think I got them all, but I'll go ahead and double check perhaps. And of course, these are the flight paths available in vanilla World of Warcraft, where in future expansions we see more and more flight paths added to different locations around this place. Let's go ahead and just run around here and grab this, where we have the Horde flight path right here, and let's pick up That's Asking a Lot, which I might not do, but I'll go ahead and pick it up right now. And I think for the most part, those are the quests that I need to do right now. And coming into here, we see that there is a bunch of cool stuff going on, which I believe unlocks at a higher level. And I believe that is everything for us right now, because everything else left right here are dungeon quests, and I believe there's like a PvP quest, and then of course our special turn-in quests. So I think on that note, we can go ahead and continue our adventures with questing, and I might actually really quickly go ahead and come into here, and we can talk to Jessica Chambers, and let's make this in my home. And this is now our Hearthstone, and we can go ahead and just hearth back here to Light's Hope Chapel, which is going to be important for us as we continue questing, and then SS Mages can go ahead and just teleport to the different cities around the Road of Azeroth. But now let's go ahead and continue our questing. Where the Western and Eastern Plaguelands are two of my favorite zones across the entirety of World of Warcraft, including a lot of its expansions, where I've always loved returning to these zones and doing all the different quests here and exploring the world, and there is a lot of lore and story that goes into this zone, so let's go ahead and talk a bit about that. Where the area now called the Western Plaguelands was a beautiful forested farmland east of Terrasfall Glades, stretching from Lordaeron in the west to the East Weald in the east. The town of Hearthglen was the seat of the regional administration, while the town of Andorhal was the center of grain distribution in Lordaeron's northern provinces. Knowing that the quickest way to spread the Plague of Undeath would be via the grain exported from Andorhal, the necromancer Kel'Thuzad and his Cult of the Damned infected the grain with the plague and set up 4 massive plague cauldrons in the fields of the area's 4 largest farmsteads. As Lordaeron collapsed, the farmlands and the forests began to die. The trees in the Plaguelands pulsate with tumor-like growths, and the needles of the pines are sickly brown. When the kingdom collapsed, the Scarlet Crusade attempted to salvage what little of their lands remained, taking possession of Mardenhold Keep in Hearthglen as a regional headquarters. In year 24, the Crusade invaded an unnamed settlement, killing its living inhabitants. Where Hearthglen is a very prominent location in this map, as well as Andorhal, that we will explore, but one place that we are not going to explore is the dungeon in this map called Scholomance, where following the Second War, the fortress at Caer Darrow was restored. The manor was the Brav's primary residence amidst their far-reaching empire, which comprised Caer Darrow, Brill, South Shore, and Terran Mill. but as the years closed to the Third War, the aristocrats became depressed, greedy, and rageful. After decades of rule, in order to preserve their fortune and hold of the land well past their lifespan, the Bravs made a deal with Kel'Thuzad, leader of the Cult of the Damned. The once opulent keep of Caerdaro secretly became the horrific Scholomance, a school of necromancy. 6 months passed, and the keep became decrepit and inhabited by dark undead beings. Acolytes of the cult learned their craft, while the family servants were used as experiments for the plague of undeath. Finally, while the scourge did not even yet fully exist in Lordaeron, a devastating disease, which was not the plague that the scourge would employ later, but an experience of Scholomance, was unleashed and ravaged Caerdaro before a visit from Uther the Lightbringer was scheduled. None survived, while the plague variant compelled its victims to wander as ghosts. The first abominations were also created in the catacombs of Scholomance from unearthed corpses that were hacked apart and pieced together. Sal Ram, the Fleshcrafter, was one of the first necromancers trained in the halls beneath Scholomance. After the Third War, the Bravs remained as undead monsters. One of Kel'Thuzad's mightiest agents, the Ravinian, also lived within the recesses of the school, ever ready to devour those students who showed any signs of weakness. The Lich, Ras Frostwhisperer, ruled over the site, guarding it for the Scourge, until he was destroyed. The mortal necromancer, Dark Master Ganlin, serves as headmaster of the school, succeeding Arash the Summoner, who was headmaster after Kel'Thuzad. Constructs, spirits, and demons are allowed to roam the halls untended, which is unexpected for such practiced necromancers. Where I remember a long time ago when I learned about Scholomance for the first time and I did the dungeon for the first time and I learned the story, it was kind of just really horrifying to see the story that goes on here, where we have all of these servants that existed in Scholomance, and we see that they were like tortured and experimented on. And when I was young, that was kind of just like a horrifying concept. And today, it is a horrifying concept to think about, of all these like innocent people that were kind of like sold out by the people that they served, and then forced into like basically servitude in a different context. But looking towards the Eastern Plaguelands, like the Western Plaguelands, the Eastern Plaguelands were once beautiful and brimming with farms and small villages known collectively as Eastweald. The regional government was centered around the city of Stratholme, the second largest city in Lordaeron. Also nearby were the towns of Darrowshire, Corrin's Crossing, and Tyr's Hand. And to the east of Stratholme was the pass leading into the southern boundaries of Quel'Thalas. During the Second War, the bordering area with Quel'Thalas saw fighting between the Alliance of Lordaeron and the Old Horde that invaded Quel'Thalas. A small band of orcs broke off from the main invading force and burned the small town of Blackwood to the ground, killing all of its inhabitants in spite of the valorous defense marshaled by its lord. In the opening hours of the Third War, the investigations into the origins of the Scourge led Prince Arthas and Jaina Proudmoore through the Terrasfog Glades and what is now the Western Plaguelands, more specifically the towns of Andrahal and Hearthglen, where they confronted the necromancer Kel'Thuzad and his cult of the damned. Kel'Thuzad told Arthas to seek out the leader of the Scourge in Lordaeron, the Dreadlord Mal'Ganis at Stratholme. While en route via Hearthglen, Arthas and Jaina were joined by Lord Uther, Master of the Silver Hand. When they arrived at Stratholme, Arthas realized that the villagers had been infected with the plague of undeath. When Uther refused to obey Arthas' command to purge the city, Arthas relieved Uther of command and disbanded the Silver Hand, and slaughtered the townsfolk himself. After hunting down Mal'Ganis and Northrend, Arthas returned as one of the Lich King's Death Knights and toppled the kingdom of Lordaeron by murdering his own father, King Tyrannus. After the fall of Lordaeron's capital, the plague spread throughout the northern regions of Lordaeron, turning them into the blighted lands they are today. The resistance against the Scourge was particularly bloody at Darrowshire, where the ghoul Horgus the Ravager and the Death Knight Marduk Blackpool, alias Marduk the Black, led an army of Scourge against the town. Only surviving paladins under Davil Crockford and the Darrowshire militia under Captain Joseph Redpath were able to stand in their way. Though they put up a valiant fight, the defenders of Darrowshire were not enough to stave off the endless legions of Scourge. Davil managed to defeat Horgus in combat, but he succumbed to the horrific wounds the ghoul had inflicted. Captain Redpath fell to Marduk's necromancy, his soul taken from his body and corrupted into the service of the Scourge, where he proceeded to turn on his fellows and tear Darrowshire apart, killing everyone who hid in their homes. After the fall of Lordaeron, Alexandros Morgraine formed a crusade from the remnants of Lordaeron's Knights of the Silver Hand and attempted to retake the shattered kingdom from both the Scourge and the undead renegades known as the Forsaken. In the Eastern Plaguelands, they took control of both the town of Tyr's Hand and the western districts of Stratholme, where they battled the forces of Baron Rivendare to gain control of the destroyed city. After the death of Alexandros Mulgrain, the Crusade went through a schism, forming factions such as the Brotherhood of the Light and the Argent Dawn, which established themselves in Light's Hope Chapel, and with those who remained in the original Crusade, renaming themselves the Scarlet Crusade. Meanwhile, the Alliance and Horde continued to fight over the abandoned Lordaeron towers scattered around the Eastern Plaguelands. Eventually, the Master of the Scourge in Lordaeron made his return to the Blighted Lands. From his citadel of Naxxramas floating over the Plaguewood near Stratholme, he prepared to continue the work he began in the name of his master, the Lich King. The dread citadel Naxxramas stood in this region, and with it, Kel'Thuzad's reign was enforced and undisputed. With the help of the Argent Dawn, daring Morgraine infiltrated the floating Scourge citadel and tried his luck at bringing it down. He ultimately failed, losing his life in the process. However, he managed to free his father, Alexandros Morgraine, formerly the wielder of the Ashbringer, from undeath, finally giving his spirit rest. Without him, the Dark Fortress was severely weakened, as he was one of the 4 horsemen who led the military forces in Naxxramas. And so with this in mind, the Argent Dawn led an all-out assault on the fortress and defeated Kel'Thuzad, but failed to actually kill him. The citadel ended up vanishing from the Plaguelands not too long after. Some other events happened, such as the Crimson Courier, who could be seen roaming from Tyr's Hand to Stratholme. She was usually escorted by 4 Crimson bodyguards. Demetria, the Scarlet Oracle, could also be made to leave Tyr's Hand alongside 8 Scarlet Troopers. Where there is just a lot of different pieces of story in the Eastern Plaguelands and the Western Plaguelands as well that I personally just really love, where Arthas and the Lich King is like my favorite storyline in all of World of Warcraft, and it's one of my favorite storylines across like all gaming and like movies and whatnot. And then all these other characters like Alexandros Morgraine, Darien Morgraine, and then we explored Terran Fordring a little bit earlier, and all these locations like Stratholme and Tyr's Hand are just really cool locations for me and what I like. And of course, in World of Warcraft, the Eastern Plaguelands is an incredibly important zone when it comes to the in-game content in the game, because Naxxramas is the final raid of Vanilla WoW, and Kel'Thuzad is the final boss of the final raid in Classic WoW. So Kel'Thuzad is basically the final boss of Vanilla World of Warcraft, which is pretty important. But of course, there is the dungeon here, Stratholme, which is kind of like a 2-part dungeon where you can go fight the Scarlet Crusade, or you can go fight the undead with Baron Rivendare. Where after the Troll Wars and King Thoradin's reign of Erethdor, many humans expanded the nation, settling in the northern lands of Lordaeron, formerly ruled by the Omani Forest Trolls. Many humans expanded the nation, settling in the northern lands of Lordaeron, formerly ruled by the Omani Forest Trolls. These humans populated the Eastweald some 2,700 years before the Dark Portal and founded new Arathi settlements. The Church of the Holy Light, with its origins tracing back to the chaos of the Troll Wars, was founded some centuries later in Lordaeron. It became a predominant human religion, and the church constructed temples and shrines throughout the human lands. Among the oldest and most revered of these holy sites were the temples in the Eastweald, including Stratholme. The region eventually fell under the sway of the Kingdom of Lordaeron. In the days when the city thrived, it was known for producing holy water, capable of cleansing even the darkest magics. Stratholme was the second largest city within the Kingdom of Lordaeron, matched only by the capital. At the beginning of the Second War, Stratholme, specifically the Alonzis Chapel, was the location where the Archbishop Alonzis Fowl founded the Holy Order of the Knights of the Silver Hand and inducted its first 5 members, including Uther the Lightbringer and Sidon Dathrahan. Prior to the burning of Quel'Thalas, Turalyon, Ilaria Windrunner, Khadgar, and their army disembarked near Stratholme and went to Quel'Thalas. During the Second War, renegade Otrak soldiers and sailors were brought here to be restrained until they could be escorted to Capital City for interrogation. Stratholme was also an important port town and chief source of Alliance oil in the north. While the city was preparing to deliver massive amounts of oil to the kingdoms in western Lordaeron, the Horde sabotaged its refineries and oil platforms to halt the shipment and then destroyed the city. With the destruction of Stratholme, the Alliance supply lines to Quel'Thalas were severed. The city was also where one of the original paladins, Tyrion Fordring, was tried for treason against the Alliance for defending the Orc Eitrig in the Hall of Justice. The trial was conducted by Uther the Lightbringer himself and overseen by various leaders of the Alliance. Tyrion was found guilty, stripped of his powers, and was exiled from the Alliance lands. The following day, the city came under attack by a small but well-trained band of orcs under the command of the young war chief Thrall, determined to save Eitrig. Amidst the chaos, Tyrion and Eitrig escaped into the countryside. Just before the Third War, the plague of undeath sweeping over Lordaeron reached Stratholme and infected shipments of grain from Andorhal. The populace, unaware of the plague, baked and consumed the infected grain, unknowingly sealing their fates. The Dreadlord Mal'Ganis had chosen Stratholme for some specific reasons. It was heavily populated and was the Eastwield's most important city, strategically and economically. It was also a holy site, being the Silverhand Paladin Order's birthplace. If Stratholme fell to the plague and became an undead stronghold, Lordaeron would lose their control of the Eastweald. Soon after, as the first undead started to rise, Prince Arthas, Uther the Lightbringer, Jaina Proudmoore, and a contingent of soldiers arrived at Stratholme, but soon realized the city had already been infected. Arthas believed that the only way to prevent Stratholme from becoming a bastion of the Scourge was to purge the city, and so the prince ordered his comrades to kill the plagued, but not yet turned citizens. For Arthas, this was as much an act of mercy as it was a strategic decision. If the population of Stratholme knew they were about to turn into undead monsters that would attack everyone they loved, what would they prefer? Arthas knew if he contracted the plague, he would rather die a clean death as a free-willed human than a mindless walking corpse. Most of the soldiers and allies, including Jaina and Uther and his paladins, chose not to help Arthas, thinking his purge was madness. The prince and some soldiers, however, went on. Fire engulfed the city, while ash and ember bellowed through the streets. Screams were heard, and the blood of innocents ran thick along the cobblestones. Almost the entirety of Stratholme's population was massacred by them, along with the undead. Amid the chaos, Arthas confronted Mal'Ganis, but the Dreadlord told him to seek him out in Northrend, fleeing from the site. With that, Arthas gathered his forces, leaving the city while fire swept over Stratholme's ruins. Days later, Jaina and Uther returned. To their shock, it was even worse than they expected, as bodies littered the streets and much of the city was burned to a husk. At some point, the undead scourge swept through Stratholme, and the Knights of the Silver Hand manufactured holy water to use against the invaders. They stored it inside small crates along with other vital supplies and distributed them throughout the city. Unfortunately, the citizens turned into scourge reinforcements before the supplies could ever be used, and the city fell under the control of the scourge. At some point, the human Razfrost Whisperer arrived to Stratholme and pledged his soul to the Lich King, being raised as a lich. Once the scourging of Lordaeron had ended, after the Death Knight Arthas had been called back to Northrend, the Lich Kel'Thuzad became the leader of the undead in the city and positioned his floating fortress, the Necropolis Naxxramas, above the plague forests near the ruined city. After the Third War, the ever-burning city was invaded by the remains of the Knights of the Silver Hand. The group consisted of Bridget Abindus, Alexandros Morgraine, with his sons Darion and Renat, as well as Sidon Dathrahan and Talon Fordring. Feeling as if they were in a maze, they were soon ambushed by the undead. During the battle, Darion was hit by dark magic, and Sidon was separated from the rest of the knights, only to be killed by the Nethrezim Balnazar. He subsequently possessed his body in order to pose as the Lord Commander. Soon, the paladins regrouped and escaped the city. Later, Renat, under the guidance of Sidon, tricked Alexandros and Fairbanks into sending them to Stratholme to rescue Darion from danger. The two charged to the bridge leading to Stratholme, but soon became trapped by the scourge coming from the city, as well as from the opposite side. After Sylvanas Windrunner freed Nathanos Blightcaller, the Ranger Lord hunted Ramstein the Gorger in the Plaguelands, but had fled to Stratholme. Anthony Harmon, in search of his wife, attempted to enter the city, but was killed by the undead. And in World of Warcraft, Stratholme was the largest stronghold held by the Scourge in all Lordaeron. Leading the undead forces in the city was a former noble turned Death Knight by the name of Baron Rivendare, who coordinated the efforts of the Lich King in the Plaguelands, where he constantly battled the force of the Scarlet Crusade and the Argent Dawn. However, one small area of Stratholme remained under the control of the living, the Scarlet Bastion, from where the Grand Crusader Sidon Dathrahan himself led the crusade against the Scourge. However, the Crusaders' fanaticism led them to believe that any who were not members were corrupted by the undead and had to be destroyed. As a result, the Argent Dawn sent adventurers to kill the Grand Crusader. To their surprise though, they discovered that the Grand Crusader had in fact been dead for years, having been impersonated by the Dread Lord Balnazar. They eventually overcame the demon, however, leaving the remnants of the Scarlet Crusade to deal with the Scourge alone. And then finally, I want to highlight the main refuge in this area of the world, which is Light's Hope Chapel, which is a place that I have always liked. But during the Third War, after Arthas' rampage through Lordaeron, Lord Maxwell Tyrosus and a few others are chosen for the secret task of unearthing the bodies of 1,000 fallen heroes of the light and bringing them to Light's Hope Chapel. It is there they were interred once more in sacred ground. This was done to protect the honored dead from being raised as nothing more than cogs in the Lich King's undead army. One of them was Kil'jaeden. Following Alexandros Morgraine's death, some paladins separated themselves from what would become the Scarlet Crusade and formed the Argent Dawn. After leaving Tirisfal Glades, they went deep into the Eastern Plaguelands and made the Light's Hope Chapel their main base. As a new faction, they allowed all races to join, even members of the Horde. From there, they would fight the undead their own way, even sending most recruits to Stratholme. Lord Raymond George was their first leader, but when he died, Lord Maxwell Tyrosus took his place. Sometime after Alexandros Morgraine was turned into a Death Knight, the Lich Kel'Thuzad led a scourge assault against Light's Hope Chapel, where the Argent Dawn was greatly outnumbered. The battle for Light's Hope Chapel was a desperate last stand, because if the Argent Dawn had failed, the scourge would claim the consecrated ground and all the righteous souls who had been laid to rest there. At some point during the battle, Tyrion Fordring arrived and joined the Argent Dawn's forces, but the tide of battle soon turned against the chapel's defenders until Daeron Morgraine ran the Ashbringer through his own chest as a final act of faith and love to free his father's soul. Alongside Alexandros Morgraine, the spirits of the 1,000 heroes interred below the chapel also awakened and brought forth a reckoning against the Scourge, decimating the undead with their vengeful fury. Unfortunately, while Light's Hope Chapel was saved, many had fallen and some were recovered by the Scourge. Among them, the corpse of Daeron Morgraine and the Ashbringer fell into the hands of Kel'Thuzad, who made him the High Lord of the Death Knights of Akris, where this story would continue in Wrath of the Lich King, the second expansion for World of Warcraft. But during the events of World of Warcraft, years after what we just talked about, Light's Hope Chapel still served as headquarters for the Argent Dawn in the Plaguelands. The Siege of the Sanguine was an attack on Light's Hope Chapel by a large army of undead Scourge led by Kirkesin the Zealous. Fortunately, the attack was quickly repelled, and Kirkesin suffered an incurable wound from Lord Maxwell Tyrosus that made Kirkesin unable to serve the Scourge in corporeal form. At some point, Tyrion Fordring and some of his reformed Knights of the Silver Hand joined the chapel. Even though they officially detached themselves from the Scarlet Crusade, the Argent Dawn still allowed negotiations. They used the chapel as their meeting point with the Brotherhood of Light and the Scarlet Crusade during the Scourge invasion heralded by Naxxramas. Where overall, as I've said, the Western and Eastern Plaguelands are two of my favorite zones in World of Warcraft, where the lore and story going on here is just super cool, and I've had a blast going through all the different quests in this episode, and I did quite a few quests. And then at the end of the episode here, I went back to Kalimdor and I did a little bit of extra stuff in the Eastern Kingdoms as well. And I just did a little bit of questing to pad in my XP a little bit, including going to Selithis, which I wasn't sure if I was going to go to or not. And I'm not really going to talk about Selithis in this video, and that's going to be for our next Let's Play series. But I did quite a few quests there before returning to the Eastern Plaguelands to do a little bit more stuff. And then I ended my journey here, where we are very close to level 60, and we will hit it next episode in the final episode of this Let's Play series. But I hope you all enjoyed watching this episode of my World of Warcraft Human Mage Let's Play series, and I hope you all are taking good care of yourselves. Remember to drink some water, check your posture, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time in the world of Azeroth. Goodbye.